For the very first time, would you raise your hand for us tonight? Just raise your hand. We have some over here, and we have some. We'll welcome you. John, I'm going to ask you to stand. John, would you stand for a second? Just stand up, John. I know you don't want to, but stand up. This is an amazing story I need to share with you. Last night I was doing my Bible study on Wednesday night, and John came in. I never saw John before, so he came in, so I did what anybody would do. I went over to him and I said, hello, my name's Pastor Mark. And he said, I know. And I said, and you are? He said, John. And I said, are you from the area? He said, no, I'm from Ipswich, Massachusetts. And I said, oh. I said, are you traveling through? He said, no. I've been watching you on YouTube, and I came down specifically for your Wednesday night study, your Thursday night study, and Sunday morning. So, John, welcome. Pretty amazing, pretty humbling. John's a great guy. You need to get to know him. Maybe you'll have a little bit of time to talk to him at the end of the study. And John, you're welcome to be here. Thank you so much. All right, let's give you a little bit in the news. Let me tell you a little bit about New World Order. This is one I shared last night, and I really believe it bears repeating. The U.S. slams the UN Human Rights Council for 5 more anti-Israeli resolutions. So what's happening in the UN, obviously, is the fact that the UN is anti-Israeli. Now, why would that be? Because the UN is comprised of anti-Semites. It's comprised of a lot of nations that hate Israel. And so it's a popular thing for them to do that. So the Security Council, there's a limited amount of nations on the Security Council. They get the vote for human rights violations. Now, if I were on the Security Council, the human rights violations nations that I would vote against would be someone like North Korea, or someone like Yemen, or someone even Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of Muslim countries that do atrocities. We know that Christians are being killed in Nigeria daily. And so the Human Rights Council got together and they voted, and I'm going to read you just a little bit. And Nikki Haley, and I'll tell you what, I'm really impressed with this woman. She is sticking up for the things she needs to stick up for, and she's very tough on the UN. I think the best thing she could possibly do is what she's doing right now. So she says this: U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, slammed the UN Human Rights Council on Friday after it approved a slew of anti-Israel decisions within the framework of its infamous Agenda Item 7. Today, the UN Human Rights Council adopted 5 resolutions. This is her speaking. Condemning Israel, Haley said in a statement. At the same time, the Council adopted only 1 resolution each against North Korea, Iran, and Syria. Let me remind you that Israel is a democracy. It is the only democracy in the Middle East, and it is a free democracy. They have Muslims that can run for elections in Israel. You can be a Muslim Israeli, and so this is not something where they're ostracizing anyone. It goes on, when the Human Rights Council treats Israel worse than North Korea, Iran, and Syria, it's the Council itself that is foolish and unworthy of its name, Haley continued. It's time for the countries who know better to demand changes. She goes on and says this: many countries agree that the Council's agenda is grossly biased against Israel, but too few are willing to fight it, she noted. When that happens, as it did today, the Council fails to fulfill its duty to uphold human rights around the world. She said this: the United States continues to evaluate our membership in the Human Rights Council, and I'm really excited about that. She concluded, our patience is not limited. Today's actions make clear that the organization lacks the credibility needed to be a true advocate for human rights. In my opinion, and you know I don't give that often, but in my opinion, I think they have the right name, the UN. I think the UN, by the way, is a joke. I think it stands for unfair, UN fair, unable, unaware, unkind, and undermining. And I think they need to be undone. That's just my opinion. We welcome your response. Anyway, let me give you a little bit more that's going on. New World Order. Here's one for you. A former undercover informant says that he provided evidence to the FBI during President Obama's first term that Russia was assisting Iran's nuclear program, even as billions in new U.S. businesses flowed to Moscow uranium industry. William Douglas Campbell told The Hill his evidence included that Russia was intercepting non-public copies of international inspection reports on Tehran's nuclear program and sending equipment, advice, and materials to a nuclear facility inside Iran. So obviously what he's saying is Russia was propping up Iran's nuclear armaments, and while Obama was making the deal with them. Now, who would this man be? Well, it's kind of interesting for his credentials. Campbell said Russian nuclear executives were extremely, hold on a second, concerned that Moscow's ongoing assistance to Iran might boomerang on them, just as they were winning billions of dollars in new nuclear fuel contracts inside the United States. Moscow was supplying nuclear services to Iran. and Moscow, specifically the leadership in Moscow, were concerned that it would offset the strategy they had here in the United States if the United States understood the close relationship between Moscow and Tehran. A spokesman for the former President Obama did not return multiple requests for comments. I'm sure not. Campbell worked from 2008 to 2014 as an undercover informant inside Rosatom, Russia, and a nuclear-controlled giant city, while posing as a consultant. He helped the FBI put several Russian and U.S. executives in prison for bribery, kickback, money laundering, extortion. He said he became concerned the United States was providing favorable decisions to the Russian nuclear industry in 2010 and 2011, clearing the way for Moscow to buy large U.S. uranium assets and to secure billions in nuclear fuel contracts, even as reported evidence of Moscow's help to Iran. So Moscow, Russia, during Obama's administration, you know what? I'm really concerned that our news media doesn't focus on any of this stuff. They're looking for collusion, and we already have collusion right here. What he was doing, what was happening was Moscow was buying nuclear, they were actually buying uranium assets from us, and they were giving them to Iran, selling them for overpriced to Iran. So they're building up Iran's nuclear facility, and Obama knew about it, by the way. This says this. He said, I got no feedback. They took my reports and report after report, and I assume they went to specific people high up assigned to analyze the reports, and that was the last I ever heard of it. In 2012, FBI agents asked Campbell to press top Russian nuclear executives about the Iran assistance, providing a list of detailed questions. The Russians became suspicious about Campbell's inquiries and fired him from his consulting job. It raised a red flag, he said, almost immediately, and within a matter of weeks, thank God I was out of harm's way. So there's someone who is reporting back to Obama, telling him that Russia is taking our nuclear assets, that we're dealing with them, and they're giving them to Iran. And what's Obama doing? He is making a deal with Iran while he knows these things. So there's a lot of collusion that was going on that had nothing to do with the president, with the present administration. We just don't hear about it because the media was favorable to the former president. Let me give you another one. Most Americans think Big Brother is spying on them. I'll read this in a moment. How many of you think that Big Brother is spying on you? Raise your hand. 85% of Americans, an astonishing 85%, believe the United States has become an Orwellian dystopia in which the government spies on our every move. A new poll is found. The report released Monday by the Monmouth University Polling Institute also found that nearly 3 out of 4 Americans believe in the existence of a shadowy deep state cabal that secretly runs the government. So it's a conspiracy theory, and they're believing in them. This growing paranoia and faith in conspiracy theories, equally prevalent across political lines. By the way, both Republicans and Democrats feel this way. It is worrisome omen for the future stability of our public institutions, said Patrick Murray, director of the Polling Institute. The strength of our government relies on public faith in protecting our freedoms, which is not particularly robust, he said. And it's not a Democratic or Republican issue. These concerns span the political spectrum. Just over half of the public, from liberals to conservatives, are either very worried or somewhat worried the government is digging into their private lives. And we're seeing it. We're seeing news item after news item about the public digging into our private lives. And don't think that Facebook and Google, that's assembling all of our information, does not have any collusion with the government. Because if the government knows anything about anyone, trust me, they're going to get everything they possibly can. This is a new article that just came out today, and this is kind of interesting one, a little bit long. I want to read a little bit to you. It says, ancient Jewish sources indicate Trump will pave the way for the third temple. They've already had a sacrifice. They've already done that. So they're really going as fast as they possibly can with the third temple. That's a little rendition of the third temple by the Temple Mount Faithful. They've actually publishing those. They're putting posters out. And by the way, it's pretty biblical because Ezekiel says there'll be a wall between that which is holy and that which is profane. And boy, if you want to see the peace come to Israel real quick, let somebody be able to broker both of those things at once. And obviously somebody's going to. I have a feeling I know who it's going to be also. So Rabbi Berger is well versed in Jewish literature. This is a rabbi. This is not a Christian. He's a rabbi. He's Jewish. And based his conclusion on several classical sources. The rabbi began his explanation by using the 11th chapter of Leviticus that delineates the laws pertaining to animals that are fit for Jewish consumption. So he goes a long way around it, but listen to it. And it's kind of insulting a little bit, but then it kind of comes back out. 4 animals are specifically mentioned as being forbidden in manner that seems textually redundant. The final animal specified as being forbidden to Jews is a chazir, which is a pig. And the swine, although it has true hoofs, with the hoofs cleft though, it does not chew its cud. it's unclean. That would be Leviticus chapter 11, verse 7. Citing Midrash Rabbah, a collection of homiletic teachings believed to have been compiled in the 5th century in Israel, Rabbi Berger explains this apparent redundancy by stressing that the 4 animals are compared to the 4 major kingdoms that mistreated Israel. Now just listen to this, because it gets pretty deep, but it surfaces. These impure species, Chazir is compared to the nation of Edom, which literally translates as red, referring to the redness of Jacob's brother, Esau. In rabbinic literature, Edom refers to Rome, which largely comprises of Esau's descendants. Edom has then come to mean Christianity, which first flourished in Rome. The comparison obviously is not flattering, but the applications are enormous. Rabbi Berger in Breaking News Israel News said, "Many times in the Bible we find that the greatest spiritual light comes from the most hidden sources of light." Now follow it. Rabbi Berger also quoted Rabbi Baya ben Asher ibn Halawa, the 13th century Spanish biblical commentator, also known as Rabbeinu Bahai. The medieval scholar wrote that the first and second temples were built by the descendants of King David, but in the future, the third temple will be built by descendants of Edom. So just piece this together. This is the 13th century, 1200 AD. You have a rabbi saying the descendants of Edom are going to build the third temple. We have a rabbi today saying the descendants of Edom are representative of Christian Rome. So listen what goes on. Rabbi Berger emphasized that these sources state explicitly that the third temple will be built by the descendants of Rome, Christianity. Rabbeinu Bahai explained this as a tikkun, a reparation. Rome destroyed the second temple, so Rome's descendants, the Christians, are going to amend this by taking part in bringing about the third temple. Rabbi Berger believes that President Trump's election has already begun the process. A rabbi noted that Donald Trump's name in Hebrew, in gematria, it's numerology, you add up the Hebrew letters, equals 424, which is the same numerical value of the phrase, the whole phrase, Musha, which is Messiah from the house of David. But Donald Trump, he says, is not righteous enough to know or knowledgeable in the Bible to actually be a Messiah. They're still looking for the Messiah, Rabbi Berger noted. Trump's connection to the Messiah is that he will play a role in one of the major functions of the Messiah. He will pave the way for building the third temple. Trump will not personally merit building the temple, he continued. Like Cyrus, though, he will pave the way for men who will begin the construction. And when the time is right, and this goes on to say this, hold on. The time is right, the third temple will come. Rabbi Berger claims that Trump's action since the inauguration has already shown this prediction about Christian role in the third temple to be true. No leader in history, he said, has recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the Jews in Israel. He pointed out he has already created a great tikkun, a reparation for the Christians through his unprecedented relationship with Jerusalem. Trump is the representative of Edom that will perform the final historic reparation for the entire nation by building the temple. And let me tell you something, this rabbi has no knowledge of eschatology. He has no knowledge of the end times. He's just saying something that, here's what I see. And even though that sounds like it's insulting, it's not. What he's saying is this: Rome destroyed the second temple, so it's going to be Rome and the descendants of Rome, rabbi after rabbi, have said they're going to rebuild it. And we know the Antichrist is going to take control of that temple. How many are with me? So now you have Jewish scholars down through the years telling us about the rebuilding of Rome. Let me give you a little bit more about the economy. I've been telling you about the dollar. I've been telling you about the run on cash all over the planet. We have nation after nation that's kind of limiting cash. It's only a matter of time really before the United States does. We've been telling you about Bitcoin and how that cryptocurrency is taking a huge bite out of economies. So this is happening now. Iran has this called the Rial. That's their dollar, the Rial, R-I-A-L. The White House has warned for months that U.S. President Donald Trump is serious about withdrawing from the nuclear agreement, a move that would mean the return of crippling U.S. sanctions to Iran. Iran's currency broke a psychological barrier this week when it began trading at, you ready for this? 50,000 reals to the $1 US. 50,000. It's a growing concern over the fate of 2015 nuclear deal. Iran's central bank and police forces are blaming speculators at exchange offices, claiming that they are driving fears that the nuclear deal will lead to a currency collapse. But the rial has already lost a fifth of its value against the dollar just this past year. And financial institutions based in Iran report the signs of economic anxiety are here. Officials are warning that some small Iranian banks are now running out of cash. And so we're watching Iran start to tank. That anxiety could aggravate inflation even further, which is already running at 20%. The White House has warned for months that President Trump is serious about withdrawing from the nuclear agreement, a move that would mean the return of crippling U.S. sanctions to Iran. Before international sanctions on Iran's nuclear program first began to bite in 2012, the rial was trading closer to 10,000 to the dollar. So they're 50,000 to the dollar. So we're watching the economy of Iran go downhill. And anytime an economy of a larger nation, Iran's not a small nation, goes down the hill, they usually engage in war. War usually brings out, the war dollars usually brings an economy back up to snuff. The only reason why the United States hasn't is because we have some fiscal economics that talks about printing more money. And so we don't go to war, we just print more money. But those nations don't do that. They will actually go to war. Speaking of war, and I want to get you there, and I'll give you a little prophecy tonight. This article says, drumbeats of Ezekiel 38. Erdogan's army of Islam plot against Israel. Now listen to this well, because these are your headlines, our headlines today, currently, in this week. And they are going right back to a 3,700-year-old prophecy of Ezekiel. So just listen to it, because it's the first time ever that anybody's even suggested this. So it's pretty prophetic. Less than a month ago, in advance of the Summit of Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, in Istanbul, the Turkish daily Yeni Şafak, which is considered one of the mouthpieces of Erdogan and his ruling Justice Development Party, published an article entitled A Call for Urgent Action. The same article was published in the newspaper's website with the more explicit title, What if an Army of Islam was formed against Israel? The article openly called for 57 member states of the OIC to form a joint army of Islam, to simultaneously attack Israel from the east, from the west, from the north, and from the south. According to Israel's newspapers, the Bet, the source of the article appears to be on the Turkish company Sadat, which among other sinister plots is aiding Hamas with funds and military gear to create a Palestinian army to join the fight against Israel. The idea of creating an army of Islam to destroy Israel was accompanied by an interactive map providing formation of military forces for a joint Muslim attack on Israel. It also provides details on military forces based in Turkey. They're actually giving you a map of 4 areas of Turkey that need to combine to be part of this army. That struck me when I read it, because if you read Ezekiel, it'll give you the ancient names that are going to come against Israel in the last days, and 4 of those names have to do with 4 sections of Turkey. I'll show them to you in a moment. So the newspaper further explained, if the member states of the OIC unite militarily, they will have the largest army in the world ever, over 5 million men. Their budget would reach approximately 175 billion. So regardless of how absurd it sounds and suicidal the plan seems, Erdogan did not disavow the report. In fact, he's reiterated on several occasions his ambition to resurrect the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is the last caliphate that was here before it was destroyed by World War I. And so we know that ISIS tried to form a caliphate. They failed miserably. A caliphate is something that unites all the Muslims together under one leader. And so they tried to do that with the ISIS. It didn't work. Now they're trying to do it again. And Erdogan, I believe, he thinks he's going to be the next caliphate. And so therefore, no one should dismiss Erdogan's hidden agenda and his illusion to commit genocide against the Jews in Israel. Erdogan is dangerous because he's insane enough not only to think in these incomprehensible terms, but to act on them in numerous fronts, and as he's doing now. So let me show you the prophecy. It's Ezekiel chapter 38. It says, Son of man, set thy face against Gog in the land of Magog. That is Russia, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. That's 2 areas of Turkey, today Turkey. One of those is Middle Turkey, the other one is northeast. And prophesy against them. Say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I'm against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn thee back and put hooks in thy jaw, will bring thee forth and all thine army. I just read to you about an army they want to develop. Horses and horsemen, and remember, they're not going to be using any type of modern terms here. These are weapons of war, horses and horsemen, clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company of bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmets. Gomer, that's another section of Turkey, all his band, and the house of Togarmah, another section of Turkey. These are the 4 corners of Turkey that are mentioned in Ezekiel, and that Erdogan just asked to get together for the OIC to join part of this army. And so we're watching prophecy kind of formulate right in front of our eyes. Now what that prophecy says is God's going to allow them to come down upon Israel, upon the mountains of Israel, upon the ones that have been gathered for the 4 corners of the earth, and they're going to be defeated. Let me tell you something, it's not just Israel that's going to defeat them, it's God going to defeat them. But we're watching that formulate right now. The clouds are gathering right now. Let me give you a little bit about religion. How many of you saw the movie? I can only imagine. How many saw it? This is a movie that you need to go see. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an article on it. I Can Only Imagine was the biggest Christian hit single of all time. It's now a movie. And you might just take an unsaved friend to see it. Thousands of years ago, the psalmist wrote, The one enthroned in heaven laughs, the Lord scoffs at them. Today we can laugh along with him. In the nation's theaters, a low-budget film with a strong Christian theme is handily outperforming a heavily promoted, big-budget, Academy Award-winning film celebrating a homoerotic relationship between an underage teenager and an adult. It did so even though the gay-themed film, Love, Simon, is being shown in 50% more theaters than I can only imagine. It's good news on several fronts. Most importantly, that when the films like I Can Only Imagine are made, they reach people who never would set foot in a church. I Can Only Imagine is a story of Bart Millard, lead vocalist of the Christian band Mercy Me. In 2001, Bart's I Can Only Imagine song became the biggest contemporary Christian single hit ever, crossing over to achieve success in mainline markets as well. In the film, Bart, played by J. Michael Finley, tells singer Amy Grant that it took him only a few minutes to write the song, which imagines what it would be like to stand in heaven before God. But Grant corrects him. It didn't take you 10 minutes to write this, it took you a lifetime. And she's right. Bart's song was inspired by his relationship with his father. I'm not going to give you the rest of it because it tells the theme of it and I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to share that, but let me tell you this. It's not some fluffy Christian film. It reveals the darkness of human sin. You and I ought to take advantage of films like I Can Only Imagine, not only because they're excellent, but also because according to the Barna Group, fewer Americans are attending church, and millennials in particular are coming of age at a time of great skepticism and cynicism towards institutions, particularly the church. They're becoming scoffers, by the way. And if you want to know what the result for scoffers are, we remember it from Wednesday night. In Proverbs 15, it'll tell you what scoffers do. And so you may want to read that. It says, so I suggest you grab an unsaved friend and go see I Can Only Imagine. And then talk about it over pizza. You might even give your friend a copy of his book, Bart's book, or one of his mega-selling CDs. Your friend may learn something he never understood before, that a gracious and loving God can heal even our greatest wounds. How many believe that? And help us forgive the ones who inflicted them. So it's pretty powerful. Let me give you a little bit more of what's happening in the church, and this is kind of interesting. If you have gray hair, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because you probably haven't died, so I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. But if you have gray hair, you want to hear about this. We all know the title of this is the church's infatuation with youth. We need the gray heads. We all know America is obsessed with youth, but what about the church? What do we do about it? The magazine Psychology Today calls it America's obsession with never growing old. Dale Archer writes, it's difficult to believe that our founding fathers powdered their wigs gray in order to appeal older and wiser. That's right, being old was in back then, but no more. From hair dyes to Botox to Viagra to wrinkle creams to a plethora of surgical procedures, the race is on to remain forever young. The bias against growing old is not just cosmetic. According to the Wall Street Journal, complaints of age discrimination filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have increased dramatically in recent years. Paul Irving, chairman of the Milken Institute Center for the Future of Aging, says workers over 50 are burdened by an outdated definition of old. Despite evidence to the contrary, they're unfairly judged to be costly, less productive and agile, and unable to learn. He adds that older workers are rarely represented in corporate diversity and inclusionary initiatives. So in a culture where everything new is said to be improved and everything old is said to be obsolete, why should we value our nation's seasoned citizens? Well, for one thing, many older people have the wisdom, experience, and yes, the energy to still get the job done. Winston Churchill, profiled in the movie The Darkest Hour, helped save the West after he turned 65. Robert Frost and William Carlos Williams wrote over 40% of their best poems after turning 60. As people of faith, we know that the Bible teaches us to respect and even to revere those with more mileage under their hood. I like the way he said that. Proverbs 16:31 says, gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained in the way of righteousness. Some of the greatest saints were very gray indeed. Think of Abraham, Moses, Sarah, then add Daniel, Anna, and Paul. So how are we doing as Christians in withstanding the cultural tide? Well, Christianity Today reports that while the average age of a Protestant senior pastor has risen to 50, a decade older than 25 years ago, older clergy may actually have a harder time finding new jobs as they age. And when a senior pastor spot opens up, some churches seek out younger candidates who are expected to serve long terms or draw in younger congregants. He says, I find this bias against those with little gray in their hair to be disappointing. Yes, the church needs young leaders, of course, but what it really needs are good leaders, no matter what their age. Pretty amazing. How many of you get the Birmingham News? If you get it, you need to cancel your subscription. And I don't say that often. This is going live. Birmingham can call me up and give me all the reports they want to. You need to cancel your subscription. They ran this, I think it was this week. This is the rapture. Will you be left behind? You better hope so. And what it talks about, it gives biblical articles and biblical references, and it talks about the rapture that we've been duped, because when God destroyed things, the ones who were left were the righteous. That is not true. It's done by the Bible Christian Society. I guess they don't want to tell you who they are. I'm going to tell you who they are. This is the Catholic Society. The Catholics do not necessarily embrace the rapture. Matter of fact, if you ask most Catholics about the end times, they will go, duh. They have no knowledge. And so now they're starting to get on the bandwagon, because it's a very popular theme. When I talk about Revelation, YouTube and Facebook lights up. So it's a very popular theme. So now they're getting in on it, and they're trying to tell us that the righteous will be the ones that will be left, and that the unrighteous are the ones that are gone. And that is not biblical. And a full page ad in the Birmingham News. So if you like the Birmingham News, stay with it, I guess. But if you're a little bit weary of them, it's time to let the Birmingham News go out of business. If we don't protest and use our own voice, who else is going to? That's right. And that's not the first thing they ran. I'm not telling you about one thing. That's not the first thing they ran. They've been running these things often, so you need to know that. Let me give you a little bit of moral decay. Aren't you glad you came to church tonight? Amen. Moral decay. How courts are disempowering parents and pushing transgender agenda. This is pretty devious. Recent developments in America's courts and legislatures have brought home a reality. Transgender activists seek to undermine parental rights. Let me tell you how they're doing it. It's very difficult for transgender activists to go against parents. Parents still do have a lot of rights. Even though they're trying to be eroded in America, they still have rights. But the gender-affirming left and the transgender are really targeting foster parents. Let me tell you why they're targeting foster parents. Because foster parents are government regulated. So the government pays them. The government can tell them what to do. They have really no rights over those children that they foster. So transgenders are trying to open up all these laws in the courts about foster parents. A foster parent can't share their religious views. A foster parent can't talk about a child if they're showing signs of wanting to have a different gender. They can't go against it. They'll be arrested. So a bill has been proposed in California and one in Delaware. The California one is to extend regulation against foster parents. Foster children are already provided access to medical and dental care, which helps defray the cost of foster parents. The proposed law would extend the state's benefit to include gender-affirming health care and gender-affirming behavioral health care. If the child, the foster parents, the state-appointed child advocate, or the lawyer ask for such treatment, the gender-affirming care may include hormone suppressants and sex reassignment surgery. Any attempt to treat a child consistent with his or her sex at birth would not be supported. Why can you not tell somebody if you were born a male, you're still a male? But you can't. The law blesses efforts to respect and affirm the child's non-assigned gender identity. They're also going to a point of changing the names on their birth certificates, changing the sex, on their birth certificates. So Delaware indirectly undermines parental rights. The Delaware Secretary of Education released proposed anti-discrimination regulations that guide schools on how to provide reasonable accommodations to those who identify with a gender different from their assigned sex. And what they'll do in that is they don't have to tell their parents. So in the news can be very, very depressing. I want to go one more with you. How many of you like Disney? Don't raise your hand. Here you go. Planned Parenthood's new low. We want a Disney princess who has had an abortion. Just when you thought Planned Parenthood cannot possibly sink any lower, it has. On Tuesday morning this past, Planned Parenthood Keystone, a branch of the left-leaning group in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, tweeted out a deeply disturbing list of needs. After the jaw-dropping tweet received serious blowbacks, even from liberal supporters, Planned Parenthood Keystone deleted it. Shocker. Screen capped it before it was removed, though, and PragerU retweeted the atrocity as well, alerting followers and others to the organization's agenda. There will be no hiding from this one. In the tweet, the organization said, "We need a Disney princess who's had an abortion." The tweet then went on to discuss the need for Disney princesses who are pro-choice, undocumented immigrants, union workers, and transvestites. So that's Disney. You're kind of silent on me tonight. I know you were planning to go to Disney. I understand. NBC tried to claim there were 800,000 gun control marchers in D.C. Not even close. So the liberal media continues to push things. In the liberal media, we have them saying that there was 800,000 students. They were looking for 1 million. That's what NBC said. CBS corrected NBC. There were less than 200,000 that were there. Now, it's a serious problem, obviously. To have school shootings is a tremendously serious problem. But the liberals are pushing this for everything they possibly can. There's no legislation that's being passed. The students haven't done a thing. What kids really need is what Proverbs says they need. They need to put God back in school. You put God back in school, you're going to have a whole lot better time. Lastly, I'd like to get to the last part of the news. Lastly, just as it's not prophecy, but I'm going to tell you, this says, no joke, former clown hopes to trade for Congress. I thought all congressmen were clowns. A clown is running for Congress, and that's no joke. Steve Lau is wearing his red nose with pride, appearing in clown makeup on his campaign website as he runs against 4 others in South Carolina's Democratic primary for the seat held by GOP Representative Ralph Norman. Lowe was a professional clown for Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. Now the state newspaper reports he's for reforming gun laws and providing universal access to health care. Lowe is a native of Camden, South Carolina, and I'll get this in a second as soon as I can turn this page, graduate of both Dartmouth and Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Clown College. He also volunteered for the presidential campaign for Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders. So I'm glad to know now that Congress is going to have a professional clown, because obviously the other ones that are there are not professional. That's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers they come forward, and thank you for all those cards and letters that you're going to be sending in, especially you congressmen. Thank you so much.